You've arrived at the site and you're ready to get to work. But before you begin, there's a lot you need to know. Things like how to use the appropriate personal protective equipment for the job you'll be doing. You'll also have to become familiar with your new surroundings and learn what potential hazards exist. But be aware, as you go along, you may face other hazards in the workplace. Knowing how to react quickly is important in order to protect yourself and others. Whether you've just started a new job or you've been at the same job for many years, now is a great time to adopt a new way of thinking when it comes to safety. That's why you need a safety orientation. In this program, you'll learn about several key safety topics that will help you work safely on the job. First, we'll cover various types of personal protective equipment, or PPE, that you may need to use. Next, we'll cover how to work safely with or around chemicals. Then we'll explain how to respond to a fire and how to prevent injuries to your back. We'll also cover how to prevent exposure to blood-borne pathogens and how to lock and tag out hazardous energy sources. Finally, we'll cover how to prevent injury from the hazards of slips, trips, and falls. The PPE you will need depends on the hazards you face. Based on an assessment of the hazards in the area where you will be working, your employer will determine and select the appropriate PPE and train you on it. PPE training will cover how to determine when you need PPE, the specific hazards that require certain PPE, how to use it properly, the limitations of PPE, and how to care for and store PPE. PPE is your personal line of defense against certain types of hazards. Know and understand the PPE you need and how to use it properly. Exposure to high noise levels may result in physical and psychological stress, but more importantly, it can cause irreversible hearing loss. You can prevent hearing loss by wearing earplugs or earmuffs. Clean earplugs and earmuffs regularly. Replace hearing protection when damaged, or if your earplugs are the disposable type. To avoid injury to your hands, wear the right gloves for the hazards of your job. Leather gloves protect you from heat, cuts, and burns, while fabric and coated fabric gloves protect you from chafing, abrasions, and dirt. Wear chemical and liquid-resistant gloves when working with corrosives, oil, and solvents, and wear insulating rubber gloves when working with or around electricity. Some hazards may require complete body protection. For example, you may be exposed to heat and radiation, hot metals, scalding liquids, body fluids, or hazardous materials or waste. Protective materials may contain fire-retardant wool, rubber, leather, synthetics, or plastic. Wear the right clothing for the hazards you will encounter. You need to wear a hard hat if you face the potential for impacts to your head from falling or flying objects, fixed objects, or contact with electrical conductors. Be sure it is the right type of hard hat for the specific hazard in your area, and make sure it fits properly, is clean, and free from damage. Safety shoes, foot guards, or leggings may be required if you work around hazards such as falling or rolling objects, sharp objects, wet and slippery surfaces, molten metals, hot surfaces, and electrical hazards. Eye protection is essential if you work around hazards such as flying fragments, hot sparks, optical radiation, splashes from molten metals, or particles such as sand, dirt, mists, dusts, and glare. To protect yourself, you will need the appropriate combination of safety glasses, side shields, goggles, or face shields. You may need respiratory protection if you work in the presence of harmful dusts, fogs, fumes, mists, gases, smoke, sprays, and certain vapors. It is vital that your respirator fit properly in order for it to be effective. If you are required to wear respiratory protection, you will first be trained, receive a medical evaluation, and be fit tested. Know the appropriate PPE you need for the hazards in your work area and know how to use it properly. Never wear damaged PPE. Inspect it before you use it and report any defects appropriately. Finally, maintain and store PPE according to your organization's guidelines. If you're not careful, working around chemicals can result in burns, respiratory problems, fires, explosions, and even death. But you can work safely with chemicals if you know the hazards and how to protect yourself properly. A great source of information is the Safety Data Sheet, or SDS, which is provided by the chemical manufacturer or distributor for every chemical in your workplace. Your employer will make them readily available, but it's up to you to review them and learn about the hazards and how to protect yourself. You'll notice every SDS follows a standardized 16-section format and provides a wealth of information from the hazards of the material to how to handle a spill or release of the chemical to proper handling and storage. Where chemicals are used or stored, wear eye protection and gloves appropriate to the hazards and avoid skin contact. Make sure all chemical containers are labeled, and if you can, substitute with less hazardous chemicals. Never eat or drink next to open containers of chemicals. Leave the area clean and uncluttered, and wash your hands after removing your gloves. Make sure you know where the nearest emergency shower, eye wash station, and first aid kits are located. Thinking about this ahead of time can help save you when seconds count. Flammable and combustible liquids present a serious fire hazard because they ignite easily and burn rapidly. If vapors build up and ignite, you could have an explosion. Store flammable and combustible liquids in closed and properly labeled containers away from acids, caustics, and oxidizers. In other words, when you clean up, don't just throw everything into one closet. Know what you are putting where. Control ignition sources like open flames and matches, but also watch for other hazards like electrical equipment, gas-fired heating, and even static electricity. Imagine, static can build up just by pouring flammable liquids from one container to another, especially in colder and drier atmospheres. Something you may not have thought about before can make all the difference now. Have you ever wondered what to do if there's a fire in your workplace? There are two easy acronyms to remember. The first is RACE. R, rescue anyone in immediate danger, but only if you can do so safely. A, alert others. Use the building's fire alarm and yell fire to warn occupants to evacuate. Then call 911, but only if you are a safe distance from the fire. C, contain the spread of fire by closing all doors and windows as you evacuate. And E, evacuate to a prearranged meeting place so you can make sure your coworkers are all safe. The second acronym, PASS, is a good way to remember how to use a fire extinguisher if faced with a small fire. PASS means P, hold the pin at the top of the extinguisher, then test it before you approach the fire. A, aim the nozzle of the extinguisher at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the handles together to use the extinguisher. Release the handle to stop. And S, sweep the nozzle from side to side, directing the extinguishing agent at the base of the flames. You only have a few seconds to extinguish a fire. You have to think quickly. If you determine it's too big to fight on your own, then follow the rules of RACE. Never try to be a hero and fight a fire by yourself that's too big. Call for help instead. If you lift heavy objects or perform other manual handling tasks, you are at risk for musculoskeletal injury. The best way to prevent back injuries is to follow some simple guidelines. Take your time when lifting. If it's too heavy, get some help. And before lifting anything, make sure you have a clear path to your destination. The proper way to lift is to stand close to the load. Keep both feet flat and firmly planted. Then, bend slightly at the knees. Next, bend slightly at the hips and keep looking up to keep your back in a neutral posture. That is, keep your back straight and relaxed. Finally, lift using your legs. It always helps to have the load waist high already. If it's on the floor, drop to one knee and then start your lift. And never lean over from a standing position. One last thing when it comes to heavy objects. It's always better to push than pull. Blood-borne pathogens are tiny organisms in human blood or other body fluids that may contain OPIM, other potentially infectious materials that cause diseases such as hepatitis B and HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, AIDS. Perhaps your coworker on the production line has just sustained a serious cut on his finger. You need to know what to do. Your first thought should be to help stop the bleeding, but remember, blood-borne pathogens are so small that they can enter the body through breaks in the skin, mucous membranes, and other ways. The best way to prevent infection is to treat all human body fluids as if they are contaminated. Think before you act. To protect yourself, put on disposable latex gloves, usually found with the first aid kit, before rendering first aid to your coworker. Always use appropriate PPE whenever there's a chance you could come into contact with bodily fluids. For example, gowns, mouthpieces, resuscitation bags, face masks, and foot protection. If you come into contact with blood or body fluids, wash your hands immediately. In fact, wash your hands before starting work, throughout your shift, especially before eating or drinking, and before going home. Surfaces soiled with blood and body fluids should be disinfected according to facility policies with a strong disinfectant. Never reuse single-use gloves. Discard after use and be careful when you take them off. Peel off gloves, careful not to expose your skin to the glove's exterior. If you are exposed to a blood-borne pathogen, seek a medical evaluation immediately. Your employer will make available to you a confidential medical evaluation along with post-exposure evaluations. More than 100 deaths and 50,000 injuries occur every year from not following lockout tagout procedures properly. Don't be part of this dreadful statistic. When performing service and maintenance operations, always follow the 7-step process to properly de-energize and eliminate all sources of potentially hazardous energy. Step 1. Shutdown preparation. Before you ever turn off a machine or piece of equipment, you must be familiar with the type and magnitude of the energy involved, the energy's hazards, and the best method for controlling that energy. Step 2. Equipment shutdown. Shut down the machine or equipment using a normal stopping means, such as a stop button, or for overhead lighting, a light switch. Always conduct an orderly shutdown to avoid any additional or increased hazards to employees as a result of de-energizing equipment. Step 3 is equipment isolation, where the energy isolating device is disconnected. All energy isolating devices used to control the energy to the machine must be physically located and placed in the off position. Next, step 4, lockout device application. Once the equipment or machine's energy isolating device has been disconnected, the lockout or tagout device must be applied. Step 5, control stored energy. Before servicing or maintenance can be conducted, all potentially hazardous stored or residual energy must be relieved, disconnected, restrained, and rendered safe once lockout-tagout devices have been applied. If stored energy could reaccumulate while performing service or maintenance work, you must continue to verify isolation. Bleed valves may be needed for the presence of hydraulic or pneumatic systems. Step 6. Verify isolation. Before you begin servicing or maintenance, verify that machines or equipment have been isolated and de-energized. This may require attempting to restart the equipment by pressing the start switch. A final verification of energy isolation is using monitoring instruments such as a voltmeter to ensure there is no electrical energy available. Step 7. Reactivation. The job is not complete just because service and maintenance may be complete. If you restart the equipment without completing this step, workers can be injured by the equipment or its energy. Always follow specific procedures before removing energy isolating devices and re-energizing the machine or equipment. For example, you may need to replace machine guards, inspect the machine or equipment itself, or remove tools from the equipment that was used for the service or maintenance job. Following the reactivation procedures helps prevent exposing you to additional potential hazards. A visual inspection may be acceptable for smaller, simple equipment. For larger, more complex machines, you may need checklists or other procedures. Falls from slips or trips on industrial stairs result in serious disabling injuries, to include brain damage, broken bones, paralysis, and neck and back trauma. With a little planning, there are many ways to make sure you and your coworkers stay safe. It's a team effort. Some of the more common preventative measures are: clean up floors and working surfaces when they become wet. Clean only one side of a passageway at a time. Provide warning signs until the slip, trip, or fall hazard correction is completed. Use slip-resistant footwear. Take down temporary electrical cords that cross aisles. Keep passageways clear. Provide and always use handrails. Use properly maintained ladders. Go the extra mile to create a safe work environment and prevent slips, trips, and falls. In this program, we've covered several key topics to help you work safely and even save lives. First, we identified and described various types of PPE you may need to protect yourself. Next, we explained how to work safely with or around chemicals. Then we described how to respond to an emergency involving fire. We identified how to prevent back injuries by lifting properly and pushing rather than pulling. We also covered how to prevent exposure to blood-borne pathogens and how to follow proper lockout tagout procedures. And finally, we identified many ways to prevent injuries from the hazards of slips, trips, and falls. When it comes to safety, adopt a new way of thinking and be prepared for whatever the day may bring. Every action you take counts, so be ready to act and react properly in any situation to ensure both the safety and well-being of you and your coworkers. And understanding how to act or react when a hazard presents itself is also an important part of safety orientation. Safety rules exist for the well-being of you and your coworkers, but they only work when you follow them. So when the day is done, you can return home safely, knowing you've done your part to make your job the safest it can be.